In 1930s Cleveland, a brutal killer stalked the shadows. Victims were dismembered. Torsos appeared in Kingsbury Run. Police Chief Eliot Ness faced a monstrous puzzle. He failed. The truth remains buried. Subscribe for more dark cases and cold clues. September 1935 marked Cleveland as a city visibly scarred by the Great Depression. Its industrial might, once a source of pride, now cast long shadows of unemployment and destitution over a populace struggling for survival. Within this landscape of hardship, a transient population found precarious refuge in neglected pockets of the city. Among these, Kingsbury Run, a sprawling ravine carved by nature and industrial neglect, crisscrossed by railway lines and choked with refuse, served as a makeshift encampment for the dispossessed. It was against this stark backdrop on a crisp autumn morning that a discovery would shatter the city's fragile peace, exposing a horror that defied comprehension. On September 23, 1935, a macabre tableau awaited authorities deep within Kingsbury Run. What began as a routine patrol stumbled upon disarticulated human remains, carefully arrayed amidst the debris. The scene was immediate and profoundly unsettling. Uniformed officers, their breath visible in the cool air, clustered grimly, their expressions reflecting shock and confusion. The skeletal structures of the ravine, denuded by early autumn, rose sharply under a bleak, low-hanging sky. Distant industrial smokestacks loomed against the grey horizon, silent witnesses to the unfolding horror. A hand-cranked camera flashed intermittently, its mechanical whirring the only sound breaking the hushed reverence surrounding John Doe No. 1. The initial assessment by the Cleveland Police Department and the coroner's office revealed an unprecedented act of brutality. The victim, a male, had been meticulously dismembered. There was no head, and the torso and limbs showed evidence of deliberate, precise severing. The sheer audacity and methodical nature of the act left investigators without immediate precedent. Forensic science in 1935 operated with rudimentary tools, yet the commitment to identifying the victim and understanding the circumstances of death was paramount. Dr. Sam Gerber, the county coroner, arrived on the scene, immediately recognizing the gravity of the situation. Under a canvas tarp, shielded from public view, Dr. Gerber began his methodical examination. His gloved hands moved with clinical detachment, carefully sifting through the remains. Laid out on a pristine white sheet, his tools, scalpels, forceps, measuring tapes, reflected the era's limited but critical investigative capabilities. Dr. Gerber meticulously documented each cut, each bone fragment, each piece of evidence, seeking patterns, angles, and any identifying characteristics that could provide a name to the anonymous victim. His initial observations indicated an unusual level of skill in the dismemberment, suggesting a deliberate and controlled process rather than a frenzied attack. The victim, eventually identified through early fingerprinting as Edward Andrassy, a transient laborer, epitomized the vulnerability of those living on the margins during the Depression. His brutal end, committed in the desolate expanse of Kingsbury Run, underscored how easily such atrocities could remain hidden, how anonymity could be both a shield and a curse. This was not a crime of passion as typically understood, but an act of chilling calculation that stripped the victim of identity and dignity, eroding the sense of safety for the city's most marginalized citizens. The horror was visceral, establishing a new, terrifying benchmark for violence in Cleveland. As the initial shock began to settle, Dr. Gerber's meticulous observations hinted at a precision, an almost surgical skill in the dismemberment that defied typical acts of violence. The question hung in the crisp autumn air, chilling the nascent investigation. Was this an isolated, grotesque tragedy born of desperation, or the chilling preamble to something far more sinister, a deliberate act signaling a new, terrifying predator lurking in the city's shadows? The harsh January of 1936 brought with it not the promise of a new year, but a chilling echo of the previous one. On January 26th, the frozen landscape near Jackass Hill yielded another gruesome discovery: a dismembered torso, subsequently identified as Florence Polillo, a woman in her mid-40s. The stark, grey light of the winter afternoon illuminated industrial structures dusted with snow, casting long, unsettling shadows as investigators converged on the site. The immediate sickening realization within the police department was palpable. This was not an isolated horror. The city of Cleveland was confronting a horrifying, repeating pattern. Dr. Samuel Gerber, the county coroner, once again undertook the grim task of forensic examination. His careful, almost ritualistic work in the sterile environment of the morgue under the humming fluorescent lights confirmed every officer's worst fears. Polillo's remains, like Andrassy's, exhibited meticulous dismemberment, decapitation, and an unsettling use of chemical treatment that rendered identification challenging and removed any trace of bodily fluids or distinguishing marks. The specific, almost surgical cuts and the pervasive chemical discoloration became the killer's undeniable signature, a mark of cold, precise brutality that stripped the victims of their identity and dignity with disturbing efficiency. Police headquarters, a scene of desperate energy, became a crucible of frustration. Detectives, their faces etched with fatigue, hunched over large city maps, marking the locations of the two discoveries. The unnerving distance between them, coupled with the killer's consistent modus operandi, suggested a methodical, intelligent perpetrator who vanished without leaving any traditional clues. No fingerprints, no weapon, no witnesses. This nascent stage of forensic science offered little recourse against such an elusive enemy. The absence of modern techniques for identification and evidence preservation only compounded the challenge, leaving investigators bewildered and increasingly helpless. Public fear, initially a ripple, now swelled into a palpable wave of collective dread. Newspaper headlines, bold and unforgiving, screamed across newsstands, catching the attention of pedestrians bundled against the biting cold. Terms like mad butcher and torso murderer began to appear, coined by a sensationalist 1930s press that fueled public perception and magnified the terror. This was no random act of violence. It was the calculated work of an entity operating with disturbing expertise, demonstrating a chilling mastery over life and death, an entity that seemed to mock the very institutions designed to protect the populace. The city now understood it faced not an isolated incident, but a methodical, repeating horror, intensifying the mystery and Cleveland's collective dread. With a second victim bearing the same horrifying marks, Cleveland knew it faced a monster. The city's collective breath hitched, awaiting a hero. Unbeknownst to them, the legendary Eliot Ness, celebrated for bringing down Al Capone, was preparing his grand entrance as public safety director, his formidable reputation preceding him. Yet he was still focused on cleaning up political corruption, utterly unaware that a far greater, more elusive horror was already beginning to define the most challenging and ultimately unresolvable chapter of his distinguished legacy. July 1936 marked a pivotal shift in Cleveland's municipal landscape, with the heralded arrival of Eliot Ness, appointed the city's new public safety director. His reputation preceded him, a formidable legend forged in the tumultuous streets of Prohibition-era Chicago, where his relentless pursuit of Al Capone earned him the moniker the Untouchable. Newsreel cameras flashed, capturing his confident, unyielding profile as his motorcade navigated bustling streets adorned with fluttering banners. Crowds, a fervent mass of hope and expectation, cheered his name, their voices echoing the widespread belief that Ness was the catalyst for an unprecedented era of civic order. The public's aspirations were monumental, perhaps even unrealistic, pinning their collective faith on a man celebrated for dismantling entrenched criminal empires. Ness wasted no time in asserting his authority, immediately directing his formidable energies towards the city's most visible afflictions: rampant political corruption and the tenacious grip of organized crime. His new office, a stark space in the municipal building, became a command center. Stacks of files detailing graft, bribery, and racketeering crimes dominated his desk, illuminated by the focused beam of his reading lamp. His gaze, intense and unwavering, was fixed on tangible adversaries, the visible syndicate bosses and the clandestine networks of influence peddling that had long plagued Cleveland. This was a battle Ness understood, a clear conflict of good versus evil, with identifiable targets and established methodologies of combat. Yet even as the city celebrated its new champion, and Ness meticulously strategized his offensive against entrenched vice, a more insidious horror continued its quiet, relentless progression. On July 22, 1936, the decomposing remains of a male, subsequently identified only as John Doe No. 2, were discovered in the desolate periphery of Kingsbury Run. The victim, dismembered and decapitated, bore the chilling hallmarks that were swiftly becoming a signature. A lone police car idled near the new discovery site, its searchlight cutting through the encroaching summer darkness, illuminating the grim work of processing another anonymous victim. A detective's fedora brim was pulled low over weary eyes, contrasting sharply with the gleaming downtown architecture visible in the distance, a stark symbol of the city's prosperity, juxtaposed against the grimy, neglected edges, where death found its anonymity. This grim discovery served as a potent, unspoken counterpoint to Ness's public-facing mission. While the public safety director immersed himself in the mechanics of political cleansing and the eradication of visible criminal enterprises, an unseen predator operated with chilling efficiency in the city's shadows. The mounting body count, each victim a testament to a killer operating outside Ness's initial purview, began to cultivate a pervasive sense of dread among those privy to the unfolding atrocities. The public's hope, so brightly invested in their new hero, was, unbeknownst to them, misplaced in the face of a far more insidious evil, silently gaining strength. Ness's reputation as the untouchable crime fighter promised salvation, a new era of order for Cleveland. Yet, as more dismembered bodies surfaced, each bearing the chilling signature of the butcher, the city began to wonder, could even a legend accustomed to tangible enemies stop a phantom, a ghost whose only calling card was dismembered flesh, and whose hunting grounds lay in the city's deepest, most forgotten shadows? The year 1937 solidified the reign of Cleveland's elusive killer, transforming isolated horrors into pervasive, city-wide terror. New bodies, or dismembered portions, materialized with chilling frequency across diverse locations. A headless torso by the Cuyahoga River, a severed head by Lake Erie, limbs scattered through Kingsbury Run, even in distant suburbs. Police maps dotted with pins depicted a spreading disease across the industrial landscape. The press, seizing upon the pattern and public panic, coined the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run. Sensational headlines, screaming across multiple pages, were clutched by panicked citizens on crowded streetcars, cementing the killer's terrifying identity and the profound vulnerability plaguing the city. Against this backdrop of unbridled hysteria, Safety Director Eliot Ness officially shifted his full attention to the torso murders. His formidable reputation, forged against Al Capone, was now directly on the line, pitted against a faceless phantom adversary. Ness convened investigators in dimly lit strategy meetings, his intense, frustrated expression revealing the immense pressure. Even the legendary G-Man battled an enemy defying conventional policing. Severe limitations of primitive forensic techniques, no DNA, difficulty fingerprinting decomposed flesh, rudimentary toxicology, rendered physical evidence maddeningly silent. The baffling absence of clear motive or victim pattern presented an insurmountable investigative void, mocking established procedures. Further complicating Ness's urgent pursuit was the initial friction with County Coroner Dr. Sam Gerber. Gerber, a man of exacting scientific principles, insisted on a meticulously slow, methodical approach to the analysis of gruesome remains. His brow furrowed in concentration as he examined minute tissue samples under a primitive microscope, his hands steady despite the pressure. While Gerber's scientific rigor was invaluable, his deliberate pace often clashed with the immediate, results-driven demands of Ness's team, who desperately sought tangible clues to quell public outcry. This professional tension, born of differing methodologies, underscored the unprecedented nature of the challenge. The relentless nature of the killer, operating with chilling impunity despite the city's most formidable lawman taking charge, eroded the very fabric of public safety. Cleveland's residents cast suspicious glances, their faces etched with profound, gnawing fear. The industrial grit of the city, from its steel mills to its railway yards, was now imbued with terrifying significance, every dark alley and desolate ravine a potential scene of unspeakable horror. The psychological toll was immense, fostering widespread paranoia and a deep-seated desperation among authorities who faced an unprecedented evil that defied all conventional investigative methods. Eliot Ness, the man who had conquered Al Capone, was now locked in a battle against an entirely different kind of foe. The Mad Butcher, a ghost leaving only dismembered flesh, remained chillingly elusive, mocking every conventional tactic. As the oppressive summer of 1938 approached, public outcry reached a fever pitch, pushing Ness to his absolute limits. He would soon resort to a desperate, unprecedented tactic, a dramatic action that would forever change the face of Kingsbury Run, and perhaps the trajectory of the entire investigation. August 1938 marked a critical juncture in the Torso murder investigation. With 12 officially acknowledged victims, each discovery more brutal than the last, the pressure on Public Safety Director Eliot Ness reached an untenable peak. Frustration festered within the city, demanding a definitive breakthrough. In a move of desperate resolve, Ness authorized an operation of unprecedented scale, a full-force cleansing of Kingsbury Run, the sprawling shanty towns and encampments colloquially known as hobo jungles that snaked through the city's industrial underbelly. These makeshift communities, home to hundreds of transients, drifters, and the dispossessed of the Depression era, had long been viewed as a potential hiding place for the elusive killer. Ness gambled that by eradicating this perceived sanctuary, the butcher would be flushed out or at the very least deprived of cover. On a somber August evening, the strategy was implemented with brutal efficiency. Uniformed police officers, their faces grim under the twilight sky, descended upon Kingsbury Run. Flames erupted almost simultaneously across the landscape as shacks, shelters, and meager possessions were systematically put to the torch. Towering plumes of black smoke ascended into the air, casting long, flickering shadows that danced grotesquely against the backdrop of the city, an inferno marking the horizon. Bewildered and distraught, hundreds of individuals were rounded up, herded by force. Close-ups of their faces revealed a spectrum of emotions, some defiant, others resigned, all deeply distressed as they were loaded into waiting paddy wagons. The raw, indiscriminate violence of the action was stark, an assault on the vulnerable under the guise of law enforcement. The immediate aftermath was one of smoldering ruins and widespread condemnation. What remained of the Kingsbury Run encampments was a desolate, scarred landscape littered with debris, an indelible scar on the city's conscience. The public's initial support for Ness, once unwavering, fractured under the weight of his heavy-handed tactics. Newspaper headlines, previously laudatory, now shifted to accusatory tones, questioning the morality and efficacy of burning out the poor to catch a killer. Critics argued vociferously that the operation was not only an affront to basic human dignity, but also profoundly counterproductive. By forcibly displacing or arresting potential witnesses, and by systematically incinerating entire communities, the authorities likely destroyed invaluable physical evidence, scattering what few tangible clues might have existed within the transient population's reach. This desperate gambit, intended to corner a phantom, instead deepened the sense of systemic failure and injustice. The very population most likely to have observed unusual activity, or even encountered the killer, was instead alienated and victimized. Ness's public image, once synonymous with unyielding justice, became irrevocably tarnished, marked by an act perceived by many as state-sanctioned violence against the defenseless. The psychological horror was multifaceted, the desperation that drove such extreme measures, the profound violation of human rights, and the chilling realization that in their haste, the authorities might have unwittingly served the killer's purpose, obscuring the trail further. Ness had ravaged Kingsbury Run, leaving behind a smoldering wasteland and a city questioning its hero. Yet amidst the smoke and chaos, the butcher remained a chilling phantom. Had the legendary lawman inadvertently destroyed crucial evidence, scattering the last vestiges of a tangible lead? Or was the real killer, the mastermind behind the gruesome spree, hiding in plain sight, far from the burning shantytowns, protected by power, privilege, and the very respectability Ness sought to uphold. The dust settled on Kingsbury Run, not only over its desolation, but over the public's expectations. The highly publicized raids of August 1938, once touted as the definitive sweep, had yielded nothing substantial, leaving only an echoing void where answers should have been. Official statements grew terse, then silent. Newspaper columns, initially ablaze with outrage and speculation, slowly turned their focus to distant wars and domestic politics, reflecting the dwindling hope of a city tired of unfulfilled promises. The killer, dubbed the Mad Butcher, had retreated into an unsettling silence, his horrific work ceasing abruptly. This cessation, rather than offering relief, cultivated a profound unease. Had he vanished, or had he simply perfected his art of blending into the tapestry of Cleveland life? Behind the veneer of official stagnation, however, a different current began to flow. Subtle whispers, initially dismissed as desperate speculation, started to coalesce in the hushed corners of professional circles, far from the tenement houses and transient camps. These rumors spoke not of a drifter or an outcast, but of a radically different kind of suspect. Someone educated, well-connected, with the protective layers of affluence and social standing. The notion was disturbing, challenging every prior assumption rooted in the grim reality of Kingsbury Run's marginalized victims. Such a figure, if real, would operate entirely outside the initial circles of suspicion, a ghost in plain sight. Eliot Ness, acutely aware of the official dead end and the growing cynicism, found his focus shifting. In the dimly lit, smoke-filled back offices, away from the public eye and the official case files gathering dust, a clandestine investigation quietly commenced. The contrast was stark. The anonymous, often nameless victims, their grainy photographs now faded, against the emerging silhouette of a shadow man, a compelling figure whose potential involvement threatened to redefine the entire narrative of the butcher cases. A single unmarked file was discreetly placed on a desk, separate from the voluminous public record. The psychological horror of this new direction was profound. The chilling realization that the perpetrator might not be a transient, but someone of considerable standing, someone seemingly above reproach within the city's respectable society, created an unsettling what-if scenario. Privilege, it appeared, could offer a cloak of invisibility, allowing monstrous acts to fester beneath a polished surface. Conversations were hushed, phone receivers gently placed back in their cradles after sensitive exchanges, each word chosen with deliberate care to avoid public record. This quiet pursuit, unacknowledged by official channels, relied on discreet inquiries and the subtle work of trusted operatives, including the occasional glint of a private investigator's badge operating in the shadows. The city's societal stratification, once merely a backdrop, now became a crucial lens through which to view the unimaginable. The elegant, stately homes behind manicured lawns in Cleveland's affluent neighborhoods suddenly felt less like symbols of order and more like potential bastions of hidden power, concealing forbidden truths. The public hunt for the Mad Butcher had reached a dead end, leaving only an eerie silence. Yet behind the closed, smoke-filled doors of Eliot Ness's inner sanctum, a different kind of pursuit was quietly underway. A pursuit not of a transient, but of a shadow man. Whispers spoke of intellect, influence, and a disturbing past, a figure whose dark secrets might hold the key to the entire gruesome puzzle. But who was he, this phantom protected by status, and why was his name never spoken aloud, confined only to the hushed, secret chambers of investigation? The meticulous inquiry into the identity of the shadow man quickly crystallized around a name that resonated with disturbing familiarity within Cleveland's inner circles. Dr. Francis Edward Sweeney. A physician by trade, Sweeney hailed from a lineage steeped in civic influence, a family whose tendrils reached deep into the city's political infrastructure. His academic bona fides were impeccable, a prestigious medical education that granted him an intimate, authoritative understanding of human anatomy. Yet beneath this veneer of respectability and professional acumen lay a troubling history, a documented pattern of alcoholism, severe mental instability, and violent outbursts that had, until now, been carefully contained and excused by his family's protective shield. The implications of Sweeney's medical background, once analyzed against the grim evidence of the Torso murders, became chillingly precise. The killer's modus operandi, characterized by its surgical exactitude, the clean dismemberments, and the deliberate chemical treatment of the remains, bore the undeniable hallmark of someone with profound anatomical knowledge and access to specialized tools and substances. Sweeney's professional life, his deep-seated fascination with anatomy, and his demonstrated expertise in dissection and preservation offered a horrifyingly direct parallel to the killer's meticulous methods. It was not merely a superficial resemblance, it was a profound, almost instructional alignment. Further complicating the emergent profile was the astonishing revelation of Sweeney's familial connections. Not only was he related to powerful political figures, but a distant marriage tie linked him, indirectly, to Eliot Ness himself. This fact, quietly discovered and noted on a handwritten document pinned to a corkboard in a shadowed corner of the investigation room, transformed the case from a hunt for a faceless monster into a deeply personal and ethically fraught dilemma. The weight of this information settled heavily in the air, creating a palpable tension among the investigators reviewing his file. Images of a younger, seemingly respectable Dr. Sweeney, perhaps in academic robes, faded family portraits hinting at his influential lineage, and the imposing facade of his stately Cleveland home now took on a sinister cast. Redacted police reports, detailing his erratic behavior and violent incidents, became stark counterpoints to the intricate anatomical diagrams in medical textbooks that lay open, seemingly in silent explanation of the precise cuts found on victims. The true horror emerged not from the unknown, but from the dawning, sickening recognition that the monster they pursued was not some fringe outsider, but a figure woven into the very fabric of Cleveland's elite, a man of privilege whose medical expertise had been perverted into an instrument of unspeakable brutality. The prospect of publicly accusing, let alone prosecuting, such a figure represented an almost insurmountable challenge in an era where social standing often transcended justice. Eliot Ness was convinced. His internal investigation pointed inexorably to Dr. Francis Sweeney as the Mad Butcher. But the killer was no longer just a phantom. He was a man of medicine, privilege, and a disturbed mind, whose influence and psychological state presented an impossible hurdle for conventional justice. How could Ness, the legendary untouchable who cleaned up a city, bring down a killer who was, in a chilling twist of fate, also untouchable, protected by the very fabric of Cleveland's elite society, and even a distant familial tie? The room was stark, a bare bulb casting deep shadows as Eliot Ness confronted Dr. Francis Edward Sweeney across a metal table. His closest team watched in silence. This clandestine crucible was the culmination of a hunt that had consumed the public safety director. Ness's conviction of Sweeney's culpability absolute. Sweeney, however, met Ness's piercing gaze with unnerving calm, almost amusement, a detached composure defying the gravity of unspoken accusations. The air thrummed with tension, the confrontation unfolding away from any public eye. A secret battle of wits. The interrogations, marked by the loud tick of a wall clock, stretched across grueling afternoons. Ness, driven by an unyielding moral compass, pressed Sweeney on every grotesque detail, victims' wounds echoing with symbolic flashes of medical instruments. Sweeney responded with feigned confusion, calculated evasions, and subtle taunts, his intellect a formidable shield. A polygraph hummed in the corner, its needles twitching erratically as questions designed to unravel his carefully constructed facade were posed. Its unofficial results hinted at profound disassociation, a mind capable of duplicity beyond standard detection. A cigarette smoldered in an ashtray, smoke curling, a visual metaphor for ungraspable truth. Despite Ness's profound certainty, public prosecution remained insurmountable. Sweeney's privileged background and powerful family connections created a silent bulwark against public scandal. Compounding this, his erratic behavior during and after these confrontations, coupled with a swift diagnosis of acute paranoid schizophrenia, provided a legally convenient defense. Mental illness, a potent barrier to prosecution in the 1930s, effectively shielded him from a public trial where irrefutable evidence beyond Ness's deep conviction, might be deemed insufficient. During this period of intense private scrutiny, a chilling observation materialized. The brutal torso murders, which had terrorized Cleveland for years, abruptly ceased. This absolute cessation, a silent confirmation of Ness's suspicions, simultaneously deepened the profound injustice. Sweeney, the man Ness believed to be the Mad Butcher, was never publicly charged nor brought to trial. Lack of official public evidence, combined with his mental state complexities and the undeniable shadow of political influence, kept him beyond the reach of conventional justice, effectively untouchable. Eliot Ness, the legendary untouchable, found himself facing an adversary truly immune to the public justice he championed. This private victory, the killer's containment, became his greatest professional failure. The public, still haunted by the phantom menace, remained oblivious to the truth, while Ness carried the crushing burden of a solved case that could never be officially closed. The psychological horror was palpable, a known monster, removed from society not by public conviction, but by a confluence of privilege, feigned madness, and the systemic limitations of justice. Eliot Ness had confronted his monster, looking into the chilling eyes of the man he believed was the Mad Butcher, and as abruptly as they began, the killings stopped. But the public remained in the dark, and the identity of the Cleveland torso murderer was never officially revealed, never prosecuted. Why? The answer, shrouded in silence, lay hidden within the walls of a state asylum, entangled with the unspoken rules of power, privilege, and a system that sometimes chose containment over public accountability, leaving Ness with a victory he could never claim and a secret that would forever haunt him. The profound silence that descended upon Cleveland in late 1938 was perhaps more unsettling than the preceding years of terror. The torso murders, which had gripped the industrial city in a sustained state of dread, abruptly ceased. This cessation was not marked by a celebrated arrest or a public conviction, but by an altogether different chilling event: the voluntary commitment of Dr. Francis Edward Sweeney to a state mental institution. The timing was too precise to be mere coincidence, an unspoken resolution forged in the shadowed corridors of power rather than the bright glare of a courtroom. The imposing, often forbidding architecture of the asylum, nestled far from the city's frantic pulse, effectively became Sweeney's unofficial prison, its gates closing symbolically on a secret known only to a select few. Despite the official silence and the absence of formal charges, Eliot Ness harbored an unwavering personal conviction of Sweeney's guilt. This deep-seated belief manifested not in public declarations, but in a series of solemn, regular visits to the state institution over the ensuing years. Ness, his expression grim and burdened by a truth he could not publicly share, would sit across from the graying doctor, a silent vigil maintained against the backdrop of institutional walls. These were not interrogations, but rather a persistent, quiet assertion of a resolution that remained unacknowledged by the legal system, a private reckoning that haunted both men. Dr. Sweeney spent the remainder of his life within the confines of various state hospitals, a permanent ward of the system. Official medical records meticulously documented his commitment and eventual death decades later, offering no hint of the monstrous accusations that had shadowed his final years. There was never an indictment, never a trial, and thus no official pronouncement of guilt concerning the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run. Yet, for Ness, and for those few privy to the concealed facts, Sweeney's institutionalization, directly correlating with the end of the murders, solidified his identity as the most probable, albeit unproven, perpetrator. This unofficial resolution left an unsettling legacy. The horror stemmed not from a dramatic capture, but from the quiet disappearance of a killer into a system designed to contain rather than prosecute. It created a chilling what-if scenario, where the truth was known to a select few, but denied to the victims and the public. The perceived circumvention of justice, influenced perhaps by societal standing or the complexities of mental health, left a lingering frustration, a silent testament to lives forgotten, and a perpetrator who vanished into the shadows. The turning of calendar pages marked years of Sweeney's confinement, mirroring the enduring silence of a city grappling with an unresolved truth. The Mad Butcher's reign of terror was over, but his ghost lingered, a silent sentinel over a city that never received official closure. For Cleveland, the abrupt cessation of murders and the quiet confinement of Dr. Sweeney became a terrifying echo of injustice, a testament to lives forgotten and a killer who disappeared into the shadows, leaving behind only unanswered questions and a city forever haunted by a truth it could never openly acknowledge. The silence was deafening, more terrifying than any scream, a permanent scar on the memory of the industrial metropolis. The present-day revitalization of Kingsbury Run belies the grim tableau of the 1930s. Officially, the Cleveland torso murders remain unsolved, a pronouncement that obscures the profound injustice. The victims, largely marginalized transients, became nameless footnotes in a chilling narrative. Their lives and brutal deaths were often overshadowed by the relentless, futile pursuit of an elusive killer. Rudimentary forensic science, nascent criminal psychology, and rampant Depression-era destitution created a perfect storm, allowing a predator to operate with impunity. The faces of the identified victims, glimpsed in archival footage, serve as poignant reminders of lives brutally cut short, now marked by anonymous gravestones. Despite the unsolved stamp prominently displayed on dusty case files, the Dr. Francis Edward Sweeney theory stands as the most compelling unofficial explanation. Sweeney, a prominent physician and cousin to a powerful politician, was a psychologically disturbed individual with a reported fascination for anatomy and erratic behavior. He had documented connections to several victims and resided near murder sites. His medical background provided the precise surgical skills evident in the dismemberments, and his subsequent institutionalization for psychiatric issues aligns with the profile of a depraved, intelligent killer. Eliot Ness's consistent, though ultimately fruitless, harassment underscored the investigation's strong suspicion, despite the lack of prosecutable evidence. Modern true crime articles and historical analyses continue to dissect these complex layers. The inability to officially close the case highlights not just limitations of 1930s law enforcement, but deeper systemic failures. Societal indifference towards the transient poor provided a vast pool of vulnerable victims whose disappearances garnered less attention. Political and social influence, particularly in Cleveland, arguably shielded individuals like Sweeney from full justice. Eliot Ness, lionized for his prohibition triumphs, found his reputation tarnished. The torso murders became an indelible stain on his heroic legacy, a professional failure that haunted his later career, suggesting the burden of this defeat in his more somber portraits, juxtaposed against his earlier fame. The Cleveland torso murders continue to exert a powerful fascination, spawning countless theories. This enduring interest stems from the profound psychological horror, anonymous victims, surgical precision, and the chilling thought of an undetected monster. The lack of definitive resolution leaves a pervasive unease, a moral discomfort that a system designed to protect failed its most vulnerable. While the killings ceased, true justice, in a public and legally recognized form, was never served, allowing the specter of the mad butcher to linger, a testament to unsolved evil much like a flickering street lamp in a desolate alley. The Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run left no definitive confession, no final smoking gun. He left only unanswered questions, a trail of dismembered ghosts, and the chilling reminder that sometimes the monsters among us don't disappear in a hail of bullets or a public trial. They simply fade away into the shadows, leaving behind a silence more terrifying than their screams, a haunting legacy that continues to captivate and disturb generations, a permanent, unsettling chapter in the annals of American crime.